place on Avenue M that would employ me. When I was a kid, I started working for there was a health food store on East 15th Street, and the gentleman that owned it used to pay me with to use a feather duster to dust off all the bottles, because nobody buys health food. Everybody knows there's this much dust on everything. I left high school. I knew I always wanted to be a police officer, but I was too young at the age of 18. I had to be 20 to be a police officer back then, so I took a job on Wall Street. I worked there for about a year and a half before I joined the New York City Police Department, where I spent the next 23 years, and I retired as a sergeant in narcotics division. I've always enjoyed politics. I've always been fascinated and very interested with politics. And the police department isn't really a place that you could kind of foster that. You're forced to walk a very narrow conduct as far as political organizations and political participation. So it was really not feasible for me to really become an active part of any political party at the time. But I was a registered Republican the whole time that I was a police officer. I think I may actually have been a registered Democrat at one point.
Yes.
Yeah, feel free. If you got fruit, throw it. I deserve it. But I'll cop to being naive. And when I first registered, I listened to that same old line about if you want to participate in New York politics, you can't do it as a Republican, and you can't vote in the primary. And it sounded perfectly reasonable. And it is kind of, it does kind of make sense. You can't. But after a short period on the police department, that'll turn anybody conservative, and it did with me too when I changed my party affiliation. When I retired, I had some extra time on my hands, and in addition to going back to school, I got a bachelor's degree in Bachelor of Arts in History. I went to graduate school, and I've completed a whole graduate program in history, with the exception of my thesis, so say a prayer for me that this thesis ever gets written. It's a long one. It's going to be in history as well. But in 2010, I found with the extra time I could get involved with politics, and I did. And I reached out to the Brooklyn GOP, and to my surprise, or maybe to my horror, they were looking for a candidate for the 48th Assembly District, which I lived in at the time. I still live there, but the district doesn't live there any longer. It's been gerrymandered out. And I'm going to take a little bit of credit for that, too, as I'll tell you. I ran against an entrenched incumbent in Doherty. He's been, well, at the time that I ran against him, he's been there for about 30 years. Does very little, showed up to vote about 60% of the time, spent most of his time out of the country. He enjoyed a very gerrymandered district where he knew it was sort of a mathematical impossibility for him to get defeated. And it was. But the part that bothered me more than that was that the Brooklyn GOP had been kind of in bed with Doherty. They gave him their line for like 12 consecutive elections. He had run unopposed for 24 years.
I think I was the last one. I ran in '98 against him.
Yeah, it was unbelievable to me that this could be a possibility, that we're just, it's bad enough that we're on a 6-to-1 statewide deficit as far as Democrats in enrollment, but like a 9-to-1 in some places in Brooklyn. It was unfathomable to me that we couldn't put one person on the ballot in 20 years against this guy. And I thought it was symptomatic of our whole problem. I didn't necessarily disagree with a lot. I mean, he was actually a difficult person to run against ideologically. I didn't really disagree with much. The guy's pretty much as conservative as a Democrat gets. Law and order conservative. He's pretty ideologically pretty compatible with me. He's had some ethical problems that I wasn't crazy about, and but I still didn't understand how they never ran anybody against this guy. And so I did. I ran against him, and I wound up taking 40% of the vote again away from him. And I think it terrified him to a degree, and they wound up gerrymandering my block. Actually, not even my block, but my side of my block out of the district, and they put it in Staten Island. Imagine, could they get rid of me any further? And they put me in a Republican Assembly District in Staten Island. So, I guess primarying a popular incumbent would have been suicide. So I've been kind of, as far as a candidate goes, I've been kind of politically inactive since then. But you guys ever watch Men in Black? After that election, I wanted one of those flash drives. I just blanked my memory. I didn't know any of this. It was all so distasteful and really off-putting. But I'm a political junkie at heart, and that's just the way it goes. But at the time, I remained active in the party. Craig Eaton was the chairman at the time, and he appointed me vice chair for law enforcement affairs, and I very happily took that mantle, which really didn't have a strict definition, but I kind of made of it what I would. I started kind of piggybacking these top of the month things at different precincts, and I made up our own certificates just to kind of, because I knew at the time that we were a dead organization if we didn't start raising our profile or start appealing to a wider audience, and really just, we had to grow the party. We had to do something. We had nothing. I'll give credit where it's due. I don't really agree with everything that Craig Eaton did, but in 2010, he had a pretty good idea of abandoning the status quo and running candidates across the board. And he filled up the slate with candidates, and I think that was definitely the way to go. And I think he was on the right track. It got me excited, it got a lot of people excited about the party. But kind of the intrigue and the mistrust and a lot of things just went downhill from there. Personalities clashed. I'm not gonna lay it at the feet of anybody, although it's tempting. But it was so off-putting that it really disenchanted me, and I kind of fell by the wayside. But before I did, I got elected the 48th district leader briefly, but until I got gerrymandered out of that job, and then I became I wound up in the 60th Assembly District, which is currently the 64th District, and I became a committee member in the 64th District. I served one term, and I kind of fell by the wayside. A lot of again, the intrigue and the personality problems and a lot of the infighting just kind of put me off, and I kind of dropped out of it for a long time. Unfortunately, Ted Gora he has children about the same age as I do. We live very close together, and we wound up coaching a lot of different sports teams together. So when Ted started to get involved, he started kind of trying to pick my brain because he's known my background. And then he came to me one day and asked if I would help him reunite kind of the fractured party that had happened between Golden and Eaton and Arnaldo Ferrara and a few other characters. And my first instinct was to run. And don't forget it, I didn't want anything to do with it. But I really saw in Ted that he had a real desire to do something right here. It wasn't self-serving. Lord knows it wasn't self-serving. The guy has plenty of things on his plate. I don't know where he gets the time or the energy. But it certainly wasn't self-serving. So I decided to get on board with him. There was a fractious and a horrible court case. It was contentious. It went on and on and on. But suffice to say, we came out on top. The other faction, it was kind of a fractured party, which is distressing, but we came out on top. We court-ordered a new convention. We elected a new slate of officers, and we kind of hit the ground running. Now, it's easy to say because I have an interest in saying it, but it's undeniable, the amount of energy. This party is completely re-energized since the last convention last September. We kind of shouldered the responsibility, even when there was two competing executive boards running. They really didn't do much. They took it as their job to obstruct and to run out the clock until we would get tired and go away. We took our responsibility, as Glenn knows very well and Bhakti knows very well, collecting signatures, collecting county committee members, collecting all different types of just the day-to-day business of the party that had to go on. We had to forge ahead, and we did. And we wound up qualifying congressional candidates. We wound up qualifying assembly candidates, including Glenn, including Dan. We just kind of forged ahead, and we didn't let all the fractiousness and the splintered party hold us back or to get us down. And that strategy worked, by and large. It became obvious that the other side was simply just dragging their feet and running out the clock. It became twice as obvious that we were actually doing the day-to-day work of the party, and it caught everybody's attention. The state party got behind us. They sponsored and they supervised the convention. They endorsed our slate of candidates. They very happily got on board with us, and now once again we started to hit the ground running and doing the day-to-day business and the work and all the workaday stuff that includes enlisting, enrolling, and managing volunteers. And we had nothing. We were starting from scratch. We had nothing left. And as Ted and I like to say, nothing is more attractive than success. The successes that we were proving just started becoming like a magnet and drawing people back. A lot of district leaders, as Glenn knows, were were kind of sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what would happen. They didn't want to get too invested. They didn't know which way this was going to turn. Once it turned, and once the work started getting done, they came back on board in droves. We have things that we never had before. We have a teen Republican club that Bhatia is working tirelessly on. If you guys follow her on Facebook, I know most of you see her here very often. I can't imagine where she gets the time to do all the things that she's doing. I really can't. She's running debates. She's running forums. She's out there enrolling, doing voter registration, outreach on Avenue M. It's just astounding that teenagers, and she has other teenagers doing this with her, that they're this excited about it, excited about politics. Not only excited about politics, it's so easy at that age to be rebellious and say, oh, you know, F everything. It's not worth it, and stick it to the man and all that. How incredible is it that she's able to line up teenagers to receive and to propagate the Republican message? It's incredible to me. Brandon Washington, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Brandon. Brandon, the Young Republican Club, doing the same thing, outreach everywhere. He's spanning the whole borough. He's getting into places, and I'll get to this in a second, he's getting into places that we don't historically have a foothold. And the fact that we don't historically have a foothold is a catastrophic failure of our organization for the past, I'm going to say 30 or 40 years, at least. Maybe for its entire history, but I'll be generous and say 30 or 40 years. Brandon is dragging us into the future. And I'm not even going to say kicking and screaming because it's willingly. It was just this, to just write off enormous swaths of population of Brooklyn, and just to say, well, those people will never vote for us. What are you, crazy? You're giving up tens of thousands of people just to say, oh, well, they historically have never voted for us. We've historically never given them a reason to vote for us. And now we are. We're planting our flags in these places. We have, like I said about giving credit where it's due, I thought very much of Craig Eaton's strategy in 2010 of filling up the ballots. We're doing it again. We have not just placeholders, we have accomplished, enthusiastic candidates all across the board. We have council candidates that are coming out of the woodwork. We have council candidates that have approached us, people that are accomplished, that have their own team in place, that have revenue streams in place, that are launching competitive council races. The other side has as much as admitted that some of these seats are in play now, and they never were before. The 43rd Council District that Bhatia is hosting a debate, there's 3 Republican candidates, and not just 3 placeholders. These are accomplished people. Al Cabano has a deep history in city politics. John Quaglione is a former candidate, has worked for Marty Golden since he was a teenager. Liam McCabe has built a grassroots organization like I've never seen before. He worked for Congressman Donovan, he worked for Congressman Grimm. He has deep and substantive political experience. He's a serious candidate. These are 3 serious candidates that are vying for this seat. And the Democrats, I don't even know what to say about them. They have 3, 4, or 5 candidates of their own on the other side. Peter Abadi's sitting out waiting to jump in. It's going to be new to all of them. These are things that never happened a political generation ago, I'll say, not just our parents, but a political generation ago. These things weren't happening. The Republicans were placeholders at best, if we even had a placeholder. And in the case of some council districts, assembly districts, and senatorial districts, not even that. We were just handing over Wilson Paculas to let other people run on our lines. That's unacceptable. Yes?
Has much thought been given to mayoral candidates? Because that's a big issue right now.
I'm glad you brought that up. We now have 3 Republican mayoral candidates, and the Brooklyn GOP was first out of the gate hosting a forum. We had Michael Faulkner, who's a reverend, former professional football player, a motivational speaker. He has a whole, he got started on his mayoral race long before it was even a mayoral race. He's been in this for 2 years already, at least. Am I overstating it? Maybe even 3. He's been at it. This guy's pounding the pavement, and I don't know how many of you had a chance to hear him speak. He's excited.
He's coming to speak for us.
You guys are going to love him. And my fear is sometimes people do better in some circumstances than other. Michael is exciting when he's talking to one person. And Michael, it gets more exciting the more people that he's speaking to. I can't wait to get this guy in front of a couple of thousand people. They'll be cheering and hoisting him up on his shoulders. Paul Massey.
If they can hold them.
If they can hold him,
Yeah.
big guy, right? Small football player, but big man, right? Paul Massey is somewhat of an out-of-towner, but he's been in New York for most of his adult life. Came here as a developer, has been very successful, has lots of money. He has a clear vision of how he wants to conduct his mayoral race. We've hosted him at that forum. He did very, very well. He seemed to have, he's not trying to be all things to all people. He faced some difficult questions at the forum that we had at in Bay Ridge at the golf course, and he handled them deftly. I mean, he's not going to be a candidate that's going to say anything to get elected. Is that good? Is that electable? We'll see. We still have a long way to go. Nicole Malliotakis, one of our incumbents, an interborough incumbent, just declared the other day. She seems to be running. I think the last I heard, she had a caveat as to whether John Katzimatidis was going to run, but I don't know if that caveat's still in place. But right now, she's running for mayor. 3 candidates, 3 fairly accomplished candidates. Again, not placeholders. Yes, Jacob.
What do we do? How do we handle Bo Dietl?
Well,
He may, because here's the thing: if we don't give him a Wilson Pakula, he might run as a Moose Party candidate, like 1912. Do we really want to have that? Like, my question is, I understand there might be issues that people have. Is it possible that someone like him gets a Wilson Pakula on the condition that this is not a formal endorsement and that he has to commit to support whichever Republican wins, even if it's not him? Is that a possibility that could happen?
I mean, well, at this point, anything. There's absolutely anything is possible. That doesn't mean it's probable or anything else. Again, that doesn't mean it's probable or anything else.
I just want to see us fractured. I just want to see us fractured
No,
against the
I
Blasio
understand
generally.
What happens with Bo Dietl largely depends on Bo Dietl. Bo Dietl has things. I'm sorry?
Isn't he registered as a
No,
Democrat?
Independent.
He re-registered.
No,
He was a Republican.
From what I understand, Bo Dietl has some paperwork problems. He attempted, from what I understand, to register as a Democrat.
Fill that
Now, I could be wrong,
Yes.
Yeah, he did.
checkbook.
but he did. From what I understand, his paperwork did not,
They didn't let him.
they didn't let it for whatever reason.
Tell him like he messed it up. He messed it up.
Yeah.
Let's.
Checked up Democrat and Independents.
Right.
Yeah.
He needs to own up his mistake. He messed it up.
Don't candidates always run on more than one party like that?
You have to be
Can't
registered
register.
one. You can get the Wilson McCullough for multiple lines, or opportunity
Are you
ballots
registered
for other
for
lines.
one
You
and then others
cannot be
endorse you?
registered for more than one party.
Right. Now, back to your question of what do we do if he decides to go rogue and create his own Bull Moose Party?
Because he's
Wanna
kind
go
of rogue right now.
That, like I said, that's gonna largely depend on Bo. I hope he does what's right for everybody. I hope he doesn't become sort of a scorched earth spoiler because of some difficulties that he may be having. But those difficulties will be addressed, and it's not gonna be addressed in the press. It's gonna be, if he wants to discuss these issues, he's gonna need to make time to speak to the chairman of all of the 5 borough GOP parties, of all the county committees.
Hopefully we can work it out.
I don't see any reason why we couldn't work it out, but politics are strange. You never know what's gonna happen. Honestly, you take people at their word, and you hope that their word is good enough. That's about all I could really say at that point. As far as, to my knowledge, Bo hasn't requested an audience,
No, not from Brooklyn?
as far as I know.
He was interviewed by the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I believe he was. Again, we'll see how that pans out. Right now, we have 3 Republican candidates that are going to go through the process. I can speak affirmatively for Ted and for myself that I don't see a problem with we both think, as far as I know, I'm speaking for both of us, that we both believe that a primary is good for the party.
It's good power, it's good press, it's good
Absolutely.
publicity.
And I think it's in keeping, like, I've been listening to what a lot of what you guys were talking about before I started speaking. I think that it's